to share with us in this wonderful place. This morning, we always start these talks with reciting the refuge prayer. We recite it 3 times. I don't know about you, but I'm kind of an inquisitive practitioner. And I always wondered, okay, why this particular prayer and why 3 times? And over the years, I've paid attention when I've been reading something or hearing a Dharma teacher teach something, and I've picked up just some understanding of what that's all about. And it seems foundational to our daily practice. And it seems like to me, it seems like a great benefit to daily practice, to understand this and to actually use it for a framework for practice, for a framework for the way we go through a day. And so I wanted to share that with you. The official title of the talk is The 3 Jewels, Outer, Inner, and Secret. That gives you some idea about the 3 times. There can be a lot of reasons for doing things repetitively. I mean, one thing is just to get used to it and to make it a part of yourselves. But there's also this other piece that there's some meaning and some resonance that actually can help us. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. So while we'll start, as usual, with chanting the refuge prayer 3 times, we'll do it again, sort of, going through the talk, so you'll get extra times, and hopefully that'll be good. You all have one of these sheets here. And on it has the refuge prayer. What I'd like to do is to just say it together in English twice, and then the 3rd time chant it in Tibetan. I like doing it in English because, as far as I know, everybody here is an English speaker, and it's always good. There's real great wisdom and benefit to understanding these words because they're powerful and they're beautiful. And then there's also great benefit to chanting them in their original language, because there's blessing that comes with the people who originally put this together. This particular refuge prayer was put together by a great Indian master who came to Tibet named Atisha. And when Atisha came to Tibet, even though he was a Vajra master, he was a Mahasiddha, he pretty much could do anything, and did from time to time with some of his students. In general, he thought that the best thing he could do for the rest of his life after he made this journey to Tibet was to teach refuge and to focus on refuge, to focus on the 3 roots, the 3 jewels, etc. And so when we're saying this prayer, it's a condensation of everything we need in Dharma, actually, and I'm going to try to break some of that open today. And it also carries the blessing of this great, great guru, Atisha, who gave his whole life to teaching the Dharma and teaching refuge in order to cut the root of suffering for all beings. And this is still doing it today. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent. I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the assembly most excellent, I take refuge until I reach enlightenment. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I achieve enlightenment for the sake of all beings. Sanje Chudong Soki Chognam La, Jang Chu Pardu Dakni Kyap Suchi, Tagi Jinso Gipe Sonam Ki, Drola Pinshir Sanjay Rupar Sho. Thank you, everybody. So, this is the way we start in Buddhism. We start with refuge. And so I asked myself, like, well, why do I need refuge? And why do I need authentic sources of refuge? I mean, really, won't just about anything that I like help me feel better? Won't it do the trick? I mean, right? I mean, we're all just, everybody wants to be happy, right? Everybody wants to feel better. Why is it this? And why isn't it some good bourbon or, you know, fill in the blank, whatever? Well, it could be those things, but what happens is we seem to actually get into things that make us feel better for a time, but then they don't last. And then we got to do something else, and then something else, and then something else. And sooner or later, rather than making us feel better, we start to feel worse, feel trapped, feel imprisoned, feel like we got to have that thing in order to have a good life, a meaningful life, a happy life. Wow. Turns out that that's not the source of refuge we might want, because it turns out that it's the source of suffering. And that's what the Buddha's first teaching was. The main issue in growing spiritually is how we deal with suffering. In the first noble truth, the Buddha put out something rather profound and brave and shocking, pretty much the opposite of what we all want to hear, which is life is suffering. And of course, there's been books and books and books about just that. And what does that mean? Because obviously on a beautiful day like today, it just doesn't feel like that. I mean, not in this moment anyway. But it is the question of suffering where the rubber meets the road. It turns out that we have some built-in, is everything okay? Everything is not okay. Ooh, everything is better. This is a great example. I'm going to use that as an example in this talk, actually. That's perfect. So the main issue is the challenge of suffering for each of us and how we take our lives and turn them into something that gives us joy without being completely overwhelmed and trampled by our circumstances, which were almost like, it seems like, hardwired to react to in particular ways. I mean, there are things that I particularly hate. You all might not particularly hate them, but when I'm around them, I have suffering. And there are other things that cause you to react and understand that you just want to get away from them and you want to get something that feels better. It's endemic in the human experience. And you know what? It's no fault of our own. That's the thing. One of our very subtle sufferings is that we want to blame somebody, and often we blame ourselves. Like, what did I do wrong in order for this load of dung to have been delivered to my house? You know, A. John Brahm wrote an essay or a book once. Who ordered this load of dung? It's a great Buddhist book from a Theravadan perspective. If you ever run across it, yeah, pick it up and read it. It's great. And it turns out, though, we carry with us wounds. And Freud talked about them, and Jung talked about them, and all kinds of therapists throughout time. There are shamans that talk about them and their ancestral wounds and historical wounds and all that kind of thing. And it turns out, well, it's not our parents' fault or our grandparents' fault. It's actually wasn't the fault of a giant mastodon which trampled our very distant grandfather 400,000 times removed. I mean, that mastodon was probably just trying to survive being stuck by a spear from somebody who was just trying to survive their hunger and starvation, and turned out that the spear wasn't up to the job to getting the food. Anyway, the mastodon, got a little annoyed, kind of pissed off about the spear, and trampled whoever that grandfather was that was hunting and broke him into a bunch of pieces, which required him to be cared for the rest of his life by people who already had too much on their plate. And so they resented our dear grandfather of the Stone Age, and so on and so forth, and yada, 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 and it just carries on generation after generation. And we humans, continually move through our days reacting to the things we don't like, our suffering, by blaming somebody else for it, and it just compounds the problem. It's nobody's fault. That's what the Buddha taught. Life contains suffering. Samsara is designed to be unsatisfactory. I don't know in all the stuff that I've ever read that I've even actually heard why that is. But that's for another talk, another time. I'll do some more research. Anyway, Buddha saw this, the story goes, he was in pretty good shape. He was kind of a prince of a minor kingdom. He had everything he wanted, and so on and so forth, doting parents and so on. But he noticed this endemic suffering and committed himself to discovering the causes for it. And he entered into a path, once he discovered the causes for it, of discovering how to remove them, how to cut them off at the root. And then he began to teach the ways for us to see the causes for ourselves and cut them off and cut our sufferings off at the root. And that's what the path of Dharma is all about. So when we do take refuge in the Buddha, we take refuge in this extraordinary, intrepid being who abandoned what he considered to be an illusory comfort in order to discover what the roots of suffering are, and then discovering it, decided to work with it and see how it could become workable. And he started to share that with others, and that's the Dharma. And those others that he shared it with, who came to support each other in kind of rewiring this hardwired 5.5 inches between our ears that turns out current scientists have discovered has neuroplasticity. Of course, Buddha figured this out 2,500 years ago, that this could be rewired. And those of us who are on that path together comprise the ones that are already like awake. We call that the noble or the awakened Sangha. And those of us who are like us, ordinary people who altogether are trying to walk this path so that we ourselves can cut suffering off at the root, and so that we ourselves can learn how to be skillful in helping others cut their suffering off at the root also. The first thing, there's a wonderful female Buddha alive right now named Khandro Rinpoche. And she had this to say about this view, about how we start to look at this, okay? She said, "We speak of the preciousness of human existence and its potential for constructive productivity, yet few of us manage to put this into practice before we grow old. We spend decades of our lives wanting happiness, peace, and contentment without sowing the causes for that aspiration. Why did we not plant the seeds of the fruition we aspire to? Buddhist logic says that if you plant a lemon seed and pray for a mango tree, logically it won't work, no matter how good and powerful your prayers are, you know. But this is what we do. We wish for happiness without planting the seeds for happiness. In fact, we do the exact opposite. We plant the causes of carelessness, thoughtlessness, mindlessness, and lack of awareness, lack of conscientiousness and consideration for others and their well-being, all the time hoping for happiness and the cessation of suffering. Call it karmic patterns, habitual tendencies, neurosis, or whatever. It is essential to understand this human behavior. So there is a logic to the path. The first step is recognizing we are always taking refuge. But in our ignorance, we take refuge in the causes of suffering. And relief, if we get it at all, is temporary at best. We plant the seeds of suffering and pray that they will grow into a pleasure grove. Renouncing that whole complexity, we've learned to take refuge in the three jewels. And that's the beginning of the Buddha Dharma. That's why we begin with a refuge ceremony where we make some formal vows. And those vows are built around, hey, I gotta have a second look at this. Everything I think makes sense maybe doesn't make sense. Everything I think makes me happy because it's my preference maybe isn't really actually the key to happiness. It might be a nice ornament, like an ornament on a Christmas tree, but we shouldn't place our hopes in it for being our refuge. So In my experience, the refuge prayer itself, the real point of this whole talk is, I think, I'm a little digression here, we're all really busy people. That's the nature of our samsaric American culture. It doesn't matter who we are, how big our job is, how little it is, or whatever. Somehow our lives just fill up. And even, I work with a lot of people who have retired. Even people who've retired actually are busy or busier than when they had work jobs that they had to show up for. It's just the way it is. So how do we, in traditional Buddhist cultures, people would go away on retreat for years. They go to a cave somewhere. They set it up so people would bring them food and they didn't have to worry about anything, and all they had to do was meditate on the nature of mind. I don't think that's in the cards for me. Probably not in the cards for any of you either. So my interest has always been in, how do I work with the authentic Dharma, the authentic teachings of the Buddha, as a householder in America today? Because it's unlikely that I'll be a cave yogi in this lifetime, just unlikely. And what I found is that, simply having a simple shrine at home, making a little offering, opening it in the morning when I open my eyes, essentially, taking a deep breath and calming down, and then using this refuge prayer. Actually, if you use it in the way I'm about to kind of unfold it, I believe is a complete practice. And for me, sometimes that's the extent of my practice in the morning. And I have to get about my day. But I'll tell you that in my experience, it has carried me and has sustained me and has stayed with me in a way throughout the day that I can see over time that I'm growing in the direction that I have always hoped that I would grow. So in my experience, it's helpful to enter refuge with mindful awareness. There's a simple practice that you can do every day as the beginning of a refuge practice, especially if you're agitated or stressed or struggling. Just sit down, become aware of your breathing, and try to steady it. Breathing down from your diaphragm. Relax your body, then take your attention into your heart and just say, I deeply wish to grow spiritually. I deeply wish to grow spiritually. Sit and do that on your breath, asking on the exhale and relaxing your body as you breathe. Breathe in and try to stay focused on your heart. So you breathe out, I wish to grow spiritually. And you breathe in and relax. And just rest your attention on your heart. With each breath, you feel it move deeper within you until your wish touches a living place within your heart. You'll feel this. Usually it feels just a little warmer, a little more open. Your shoulders open up a little bit more. Instead of being hunched over like this, you're just kind of relaxed. I'm thoroughly convinced that you cannot practice Dharma well without relaxing. And sometimes Dharma practice is hard. And we tense up. And that's the challenge right there. It's really actually training in relaxation. At that point, you realize I'm tensing up. And you have to find a way to let go of that reaction formation and just open and relax. So first thing in the morning, you can do that. Just a little bit, simple. Breathe into your heart and wish to grow. You can't force it. Tension won't help. It just adds resistance. So you patiently reach into a simple and sweet and profound place within yourself, asking deeply to grow spiritually. And after a little while, maybe a week, maybe some months, but after a little while, see if you don't feel that growth taking root a little bit. That's planting a good seed, and you can plant it and care for it every morning by doing that practice. And after that, this could be a 20 or 30-second thing, right? I'm not talking about like a meditation marathon here. Then you can pray the refuge prayer 3 times. Well, there was where my question came in. Why 3 times? Well, it turns out in the teachings, we talk about an outer refuge, an inner refuge, and a secret refuge. Woo-woo, secret refuge. I told Lama Kathy I was going to give this talk, and she's like, because the secret refuge usually we don't talk about it unless you're in 3-year retreat or something. But I have a way of talking about it that she says is kosher, so we'll go with it. So get ready, you get to hear some stuff today. Okay. But we start with the outer refuge. All right, so we start with the outer refuge because normally we're basically in a dualistic state of mind. There's me and there's you and there's my internal reality and then this external reality and so forth. And we got to kind of start where we are. The ultimate teaching is that everything's non-dual, but we just aren't wired to see things that way. And it's not helpful to pretend. It has to be an experiential realization. If it's going to do any good, it's got to actually be part of the rewiring of our mind. And so we start where we are. And where we are is, okay, I've calmed down, I wish to grow. And there are Buddhas. There's the historical Buddha, but there are as many Buddhas as there are atoms in the universe. And they all want one thing. They all want for us to be happy. That's the nature of a Buddha. They all want to help us learn to cut the root of our suffering. And so, rather than taking refuge in, getting my hair just right, not that I worry about that much, but whatever it is you might take refuge in, rather than looking good. I mean, I don't think that anybody should look sloppy or not good, but rather than taking refuge in that, taking a moment and recognizing that all the Buddhas that ever were, all the Buddhas that are, all the Buddhas that ever will be, are there for us, are there for me, are pulling for me, are wanting to touch me in a way that blesses me with some insight, some growth, some wisdom. And I can take refuge in that sense of not being alone, and in fact, having a very powerful ally, even though I can't see that ally with my physical eyes. And we can start there. The description of this talk I wrote, a spiritual path is a dynamic process of transformation. Our understanding of the three jewels, the objects of refuge, and how we rely on them changes as we develop. Uncovering the outer, inner, and secret layers of refuge opens us to flexibility that we need for growth, while it keeps us firmly rooted and supported on our path, beginning to end. It's really important that we stay rooted in something authentic. As one who's been down a few blind canyons and gotten lost on the spiritual path before, I can tell you from personal experience, it's a crushing thing to realize that. And what I've found with the Buddha Dharma, because of its very nature, is that it is constantly supporting every step in some kind of an authentic way. Ram Dass, who wasn't a Buddhist particularly, but he said some really smart stuff, said this, and I think it applies to this view of refuge. If this is the beginning of a new perfect Aquarian age, my work is to quiet my mind, open my heart, and relieve suffering. Or, if this is Armageddon, the end of the world, my work is to quiet my mind, open my heart, and relieve suffering. So, interesting, those three things. Quiet my mind. The nature of our minds is Buddha nature. That's the teaching. So when we quiet this mind, like that first little practice of just resting in your heart, helps quiet the mind, it's putting us in touch with our Buddha nature. It helps us feel a resonance with all these Buddhas that are actually present in our lives, even if invisible. Even if invisible. Opening our hearts is what the Dharma is all about. Rather than being closed down and working as hard as we can to get what we want and avoid what we don't want, which is clinging, which is precisely what the Buddha taught was the cause of suffering. That's the work of the Dharma, opening our hearts and keeping them open, right? And relieving suffering is the activity of the Buddhas. It's the activity of the Sangha. It's what we do for each other. It's why it's so important that, we have a board in this particular center, for instance, and talking about ordinary Sangha, and in many centers, that works on inclusiveness, that works on nonviolent communication, that works on having a set of values and goals that are consistent with the ultimate fruition of the Dharma, which is cutting the root of suffering. Yeah. So ultimately, our minds are Buddha, the Dharma, which is the Dharmakaya. Some people, I'm going to throw the Kayas in here because people always ask about them. I'm just going to try to make it simple and be able to include it right here in in the refuge prayer we already all know. So ultimately, our minds are all Buddha. So we're taking refuge in these extraordinary allies that are all around us. We're also taking refuge in the true nature of our own mind. That's the inner Buddha. Our heart is the Dharma. The nature of our own heart is the Dharma. The Sambhogakaya. And that's why in the refuge prayer, we say, by achieving generosity and the other perfections. Well, we're trying to keep the prayer short, so that's shorthand, right? And those 6 perfections are actually an atmosphere that we can engender while we're praying that prayer, an atmosphere of generosity and ethics and patience and joy. And mindful awareness and wisdom. Those are called the 6 perfections. Well, when we take refuge in the Dharma, we realize that the heart of the Dharma, which is the atmosphere around all these Buddhas that are here to support us, that we're taking refuge in, that's like what they live and breathe, right? It's also what we breathe in and becomes the atmosphere within us. That's the inner refuge of Dharma. So as we say the refuge prayer the first time, we can think, oh, there's Buddha just giving me a shower of blessings. And oh, I'm swimming in the sea of generosity and ethics and patience and joy and mindful awareness and wisdom. That's the sea that I'm living in. And oh, I'm surrounded by this wonderful Sangha. I can call Jacob when I need somebody to support me. Or I just picked him up, but a lot of other people in here too. But we recognize that as the outer refuge, and it can come alive for us. So rather than just saying the prayer and hoping for magic to happen, we can use it to plant the seeds of enlightenment rather than just use it as a prayer that gives us a break from our usual seed planting of our preferences, okay? That's the way renunciation works. It isn't like this big violent move where we cut all this off and we adopt all that, because frankly, that's just being trapped in more preferences. It's more like recognizing the reality of Dharma in our lives, even though it's not so apparent all the time. So at this point, when you've taken outer refuge and you've started to drift into the second repetition of inner refuge, which I'm about to get to, if you have time, obviously not in a community setting where we all go from one line to the next, in which case it's just good to know how to hold your mind while we go from one line to the next. That's the way that we do community meditation, is knowing what the prayers and the meditations are and doing them internally together while we're saying the words externally together. But you can ask yourself questions. Could I be a Buddha in this lifetime? Could I be a Buddha in this lifetime? The teachings say I could. It's kind of a wake-up call. And then whether your answer is yes or no, ask some more. Ask, do I really think that I could or I couldn't? And if I don't really think that, why not? And what do I really think? And so forth. In other words, make that refuge prayer come alive for you. I think asking questions is a great way to make anything come alive, any conversation that you're having with another or even within yourself. So, what the Dharma teaches is, this is another quote from another teacher that I like, Nisargadatta. He said, "We do not need to search in order to find our true being. We already are it." I like his directness. And the mind, which searches for it, is the very reason we cannot find it. So what did Buddha teach? Buddha taught, do no harm to yourself or others. Because if you harm yourself or others, you're harming a Buddha, or a Buddha to be. How horrible. We need all the Buddhas we can get in this universe. That's obvious. Practice virtue as much as possible. In other words, create this atmosphere inside and out of these 6 perfections, right? And then the last one, totally tame your mind. And that's why we need to tame our mind. We use the mind to practice the Dharma, but at the same time, we have to recognize that our obscurations and hindrances and mental patterns and preferences and all that stuff that we think makes up a self, a me, is the very reason that we cannot see who the real me actually is. The real me is a unique Buddha. You have your own sacred truth already in you. And the only thing standing between you and realizing your own sacred truth, uncovering that, oddly enough, is your own mind. So Buddha said, train your mind, and then taught the Dharma, which is, like a whole bunch of different ways of training the mind. The Dharma, to be clear, isn't just the teachings of the Buddha or the teachings of Buddhist teachers. It refers actually to any phenomena that can be used to reveal the nature of reality. So, you could, Jeannie and I were watching a squirrel eat an acorn this morning. It was like a beautiful moment of interdependence between us and the squirrel, and between the squirrel and the acorn and the tree that produced the acorn, and what it's rooted in, and the fact that that tree gives off a whole lot of oxygen that helps us breathe and be alive, and we give off a whole bunch of carbon dioxide, which helps the tree breathe and be alive. That moment of looking through the window in our living room, that was Dharma too, right? So Dharma refers to certainly the teachings of the Buddha, obviously, but it also refers to everything that wakes us up. So this instruction of starting with mindful awareness and engendering mindful awareness is really important, because these things, Dharma is happening all the time. Mostly we don't notice it. Mostly we're distracted, once again, by our mind, the thing that keeps us from seeing what it is we need to see. On an even deeper level, Dharma refers to the attainments which manifest in the minds of practitioners, resulting from practicing the teachings, because they're the direct experiences of what we call our most sacred truth. And that is the definitive meaning of reality. So when we take refuge in the Dharma, engender the qualities of a bodhisattva, those 6 perfections. In the sadhana of Tara that we do here every Sunday morning, early, like 7 o'clock in the morning, there's a version of the Bodhisattva vow. And I have a translation here that also gives the feeling of what Dharma is. So I wanted to share it with you. It goes like this: however innumerable beings are, I vow to meet them with kindness and interest. However inexhaustible the states of suffering are, I vow to touch them with patience and love. However immeasurable the dharmas are, I vow to explore them deeply. However incomparable the mystery of inner being, I vow to surrender to it freely. From this day forth, with wisdom and compassion as my lamp and staff, I dedicate all my life energies to the welfare of all beings. So that is refuge in the Dharma. It's like pouring your life into that. So that's outer refuge. Inner refuge is about the second repetition of the refuge prayer. And really, the inner refuge is usually characterized as Lama, Yidam, and Dakini, okay? Instead of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. It's all right. Just, why Lama? Well, Lama is the root of blessings. So it's easy, when you're doing the second repetition, feel like you're being flooded with blessings. That Buddha is just pouring light through you and you're filling up with it. Yidam Yidam in Tibetan means connecting the mind. That's loose translation. But we call like Tara and Chenrezi and Vajrasattva and all these enlightened beings Yidams, and we do their practices. But in terms of taking refuge in them, what you have to understand is a Yidam, we do those practices in order to cultivate those qualities, kind of provide good fertilizer and good soil for the seeds that we plant of those 6 perfections, okay? But in taking refuge, briefly in the morning when you're just repeating, I take refuge in the Dharma the second time, or take refuge in the Yidam, just realize that that is the blessing of speech. Speech is the way we connect with one another, and that we're going to fill our speech with these perfections. We're going to engender these perfections. They're going to become the mode of our communication with life. And we're going to cut off all the, reactive crap that we normally have. With mindful awareness, we can see it coming and we can drop the story. And we can recall our refuge in these 6 perfections of generosity and so forth. And then Sangha in the inner refuge is called dakini, or protector. And dakinis are the root of enlightened activities. The dakinis are peaceful. They take us by the hand and lead us lovingly. When we lose our confidence, they adjust our microphone. Since when we don't have it on right, and so dakinis usually are depicted as feminine, but really what they are mother's love engendered in all of us in the Sangha. Protectors are considered wrathful, so they're like Mahakala, who's up there too somewhere. And they're there to challenge our deep-seated misconceptions and obstacles on our path. And so they've got to be a little more wrathful, because those misconceptions and obstacles can be pretty tough. So the third repetition, the secret refuge, I promise you, I give you secrets. So typically they're called the channels, winds, and drops. I'm not even getting into that. Generally, that's something taught in our tradition in 3-year retreat, because when ego co-ops those teachings, they can get dangerous. They can lead to the opposite of happiness. They can lead to suffering, and so why mess with it? But there's a way of actually talking about it that is perfect for us, ordinary folks who get up and do things all day. Channels can be regarded as awareness of the present moment. So when you're doing the third repetition, take refuge in Buddha, take refuge in your awareness of the present moment. The winds, which are the energies that are moving through us. We have tremendous energies, and there are all kinds of ways of talking about them. I kind of like the shamanic way of talking about them, which is the solidity of the earth, the humility and power of water, the brightness and warmth of fire, the ability to touch and nourish everything without exception, like air or wind, and of course, the vast, complete, limitless openness of space. So those winds are those energies. But from a meditative point of view, while you're practicing refuge, forget all that stuff I just said. And just realize that meditating on that third Dharma, the secret Dharma, is simply settling your mind in its natural state. Its natural state is purely open, where all those energies are just the luminosity, the clarity of your awareness. So, first, awareness of the present moment. Then, settling your mind in its natural state. That's Dharma. And then the third thing is essences. Channels, winds, and essences, or sometimes called drops. Essences, merging the mind with space. Essences are merging the mind with space. It's the way that we end all meditation. So if we start with this sense of awareness of the present moment, of blessings within us and without us, that we're literally breathing in blessings and breathing out blessings. That what we breathe in touches us at a cellular level, completely, and goes out of us and impacts the world completely, all the way in the other side of the world in India, you know. It's feeding trees everywhere, so we're connected. That's awareness of the present moment, that we're completely apart. We're at home in the universe. Then settling in the natural state. Is just following that breath and the natural connection to everything. And then merging the mind with space is just dropping all of that and resting. Simply realizing that the air within and the air without are one thing. There are no sides. There's only us. There's no inner and outer. I mean, we kind of go inner, outer, and secret because our minds need that, because we're not experiencing life that way. And the Dharma, step by step, wants to take us by the hand so that we engage ultimate reality. And that's ultimate reality, is interdependence, that we're connected. Everything's connected. No sides, just us. And we relax. At the end of that, just like at the end of this talk, we dedicate the merit of it, because there's a lot of merit in taking your mind through those steps so that it can have its own realization of ultimate reality. I mean, what better thing could you possibly do? Because that's going to benefit all beings, whoever you meet, even people you don't meet, because the people you meet will meet people, and you know, sooner or later, just like your breath, it goes all over the universe. So we realize the virtue of that. You dedicate the merit, get off our cushion, and get going. But we get going with this sense of refuge in the authentic sources of refuge. So that's pretty much what I had to say. Believe it or not, I didn't know if I would be able to complete this whole thing today, but I did, and there's still a couple minutes left. If anybody's got a question or a comment or an observation, whatever, please join the party.
Hi there. Several years ago, I went to hear the Karmapa. Oh, when you were talking about relaxing,
Yeah.
it reminded me of a talk I heard by the Karmapa, and he said, well, you know, a lot of people teach the breathing, and you count your breaths, and he said, I think the act of counting the breaths is too much effort.
So, well, if there are no more questions or anything, let's take a moment and dedicate the merit of having been here together. Thank you for your attention. It means the world to me to be able to be here with all of you. So let's just say it together in English. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free beings. The courageous Manjushri, who knows everything as it is, Samantabhadra, who knows in the same way, and all the bodhisattvas, that I may follow in their path, I completely dedicate all of this virtue. Thank you.